Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition. We're going to talk about Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review's concept of who should be allowed to change a Dungeons & Dragons campaign world's theme and lore and culture. Okay? All right, so let's get into this. All right, so first of all, let's talk about Unscripted and Unchained RPG review channel. So it's interesting. I think they're right. He's a Dungeons & Dragons commentator. I'm a Dungeons & Dragons commentator. Okay, but I think we're standing on two sides of a fence. Okay, and the reality is, I think the division between me and Unscripted and Unchained RPG review, the difference between us is what we care about with Dungeons & Dragons. I think that Unscripted and Unchained RPG reviews, the primary guy over there, he is a Relic Runner. Now, what do I mean by a Relic Runner? He runs copies of old Dungeons and Dragons games. He also runs, and that makes him a Relic Runner to me. All right, so let's talk about this. I think that the world, any other channel on the internet, right? Like any other channel on YouTube where you got a D&D commentator, the word Dungeon Master is simple enough, right? This is the deep end of the pool. We discuss Dungeons & Dragons at a different level, right? Nothing simple here. Like, we left simple behind, right? So this is complicated and layered and nuanced, all right? So in my opinion, Dungeon Masters are people who run the current version of Dungeons & Dragons, okay? If you run older versions of Dungeons & Dragons, okay, you're a Dungeon Pastor, P-A-S-T-E-R. Dungeon Master with the M replaced the P. And the reason why is you care more if you run it as your primary game, okay? And by the way, Dungeon Master runs as their primary game the current edition of Dungeons & Dragons, the now, right? All right. A Dungeon Pastor runs and I don't see that as a Dungeon Pastor is someone who runs primarily at the 51% level, runs primarily older versions of Dungeons & Dragons, 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E, Beck-Me, right? That kind of thing, right? Mulvey, Holmes, White Box, all that, right? That's a Dungeon Pastor. A Relic Runner is someone who runs copies of old Dungeons & Dragons. So this would be, good examples of these would be Five Torches Deep, Torchbearer, Old School Essentials, Adventurer, Conqueror, King, that kind of thing, right? Now, can you be a Dungeon Pastor and a Relic Runner? Not in my opinion. By the way, this is completely my structure. It's how I divide the world of people who run role-playing games that are either Dungeons & Dragons or are trying to be Dungeons & Dragons, right? Okay, so basically, I think if you're a Relic Runner and you run copies, that preempts your being a Dungeon Pastor, right? If you primarily run copies, so I think at the end of the day, I think Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review is a Dungeon Pastor. He cares more about the past of the game than he does the future, and that's by his own words, right? He's like, he does not buy 5e and intends not to buy 5e, right? However, the reason why, so we're standing on two sides of a fence. I care about the present and the future of Dungeons & Dragons. He cares about the past of Dungeons & Dragons, but we both care about Dungeons & Dragons. And I'm going to link to his channel below, and I disagree with virtually everything he says, right? The only thing we agree on is that Dungeons & Dragons is awesome, right? The other thing the reason why I'm going to point you to his channel is he's willing to, at this point, I'm fairly certain of this, he's willing to engage in a dialogue, right? And what that means is he's really say, I respect you, you respect me, let's talk about this, right? Let's not insult each other, let's not go to ad hominem attacks, let's have a discourse, right? And I'm definitely down for that, right? So I really dig him as a Dungeons and Dragons content creator, even though I think the vast majority of what he says is wrong. Okay, but he comments on my content a lot, right? And a lot of his contents are, it's just him saying, old Dungeons and Dragons is cool, new Dungeons and Dragons sucks, saying it in different words than that, but generally that's a lot of his his comments. But he said something that was brilliant. It's good enough for me to do an entire video on it. Let's talk about it. So he said, he was discussing, this is just a subset of one comment he wrote, but it was absolutely brilliant. He said, in my game, players do not change the campaign world theme, the culture, or the lore, but their player characters' actions might. That is an incredibly good, concise capturing a statement, a synopsis of like the last 10 years of Dungeons and Dragons debate, right? And I think that's one thing that frustrates a lot of people with 5e is this, and I have to say, I don't like Session Zero, right? And I think that's one of the things that frustrates a lot of people about Session Zero is it's an invitation for your player to change your world, not your player character, right? So the way I like to run Dungeons & Dragons is I say, hey, I get an idea in my head, and I say, hey, I'm ready to run Dungeons & Dragons. And then I go to the people I want to play in that game, and I say, this is my concept, okay? And I do a good job of describing what that concept is. I say, this is my concept, right? And we're ready to go, right? And they're like, okay, let me hear you all the way through, So, and I'll even entertain a question, right? But, and give them an answer. But the reality is, it's take it or leave it, right? Like, if you don't like this, I'm going to run with the people who do, and I'm going to keep asking until I get 3 players. I can run, and I actually, tell the truth, I can run with 2 players and be perfectly happy. Because, I think, actually, I'm going toward lower player counts more and more, right? And so 2 players is more than enough generally. Now, I'm very blessed. We currently have 4 players at our, actually we have 3 players at our table. We may have 4 again soon. And so, but that's where we are right now. But this is brilliant. This is a really brilliant description of how a campaign world should be changed, right? So when I do my Dungeons & Dragons game, I don't want, I think campaign Session Zero is a committee to have a tabletop role-playing game, and nothing could be more boring or more utterly filled with suck than Session Zero, right? And it's an invitation for your players to change your campaign world, right? And I want the theme, the culture, and the lore to be determined by the dungeon master. They set the vision, okay? Now the flip side of this is once you get playing, those player characters, in my opinion, I don't think it's a might, right? I want them to fundamentally change my culture, my lore, and my theme in my campaign world, right? And I think the flip side is we as dungeon masters need to be ready for them to do that, right? So me and Unscripted and Unchained RPG review, we're on 2 sides of the fence. We both care about Dungeons and Dragons. He cares about the past of it. I care about the future of it, right? And I don't think it'd be hard for us to disagree more on Dungeons and Dragons, right? But this was a brilliant comment, and I love understanding that there's 2 different ways to change a campaign world's lore, theme, and culture, right? You could do it as a player, or you could do it as a player character, right? Doing it as a player, I 100% agree with Unscripted and Unchained RPG review. I totally think that's the wrong way to go, right? Don't change a DM's world as a player by your complaints and your special foibles, right? Get in the game. If you don't like something, and actually, the other thing is, if you don't like what the dungeon master is throwing down, right, in the beginning, it's totally okay to say, no, I don't want to play in that game. And I think we as dungeon masters should not be offended in any way for, when we say, hey, this is what I'm running, right? And then the players are like, nah, that's not for me, man. We got to be very respectful and actually thankful for them, to them, and say, hey, thanks for hearing what the campaign would be. I dig it that's not your jam. And actually, say, hey, I'll, if you can, extend an invitation to them again. Don't just cut them out after one no. you know, and then, but make your world as a dungeon master, right? But be ready and be willing and be excited for your player characters to change your world with their player character actions. Because when you're building that world, it's you. Once that game starts, it's them, right? And they really should be changing your culture, your theme, and your lore. Brilliant comment from Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I wanted to say thank you, Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. This is a super fun video for me to do. It really gave me a lot to think about, right? And also gives me some hope, because I do think that people who are standing on that side, on the fence, on either side of the fence, people who care about the future of Dungeons and Dragons, people who care about the past of Dungeons and Dragons, it's nice that there could still be some discourse. Well, that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.